Hey you guys, it's Lynnea. Today I'm going to be creating a fun Seesaw Slider card with the Bunny Band stamp set. Now, as I was looking through my supplies and figuring out what I wanted to use for today's video, I realized that I had never stamped and colored the little critters from the Bunny Band stamp set, and I thought that had to be some kind of atrocious crime. So I busted out this stamp set. I stamped a couple of the images with the LDRS Creative Raven Hybrid ink, and I stamped out just some of my favorites. I love the little, I'm not sure if you would call it a gazebo, but the little stage, the little bunny singing. There's a bunny playing the harmonica, a little banjo, and then some dancing bunnies. So I just stamped out some of my favorites, and I'm going to color them in with my alcohol markers. I kept a little bit of the coloring in. I wanted the little bunnies to be a warm gray, but on the whiter side of a warm gray. So I kept that coloring in a little bit. And now for the gazebo, I wanted this to be white as well, but a cool gray type of white. So when I color whites, I either use cool gray markers or neutral gray. So today I'm actually using the neutral gray. And I started with some darker shading where the sun I thought would kind of give some shadow. And then the top of the roof here where the sun would be hitting, I kept that lighter. I color dark to light, which I know is technically the incorrect way to color, but that's just the way that I do it. One of my favorite parts about making a card is popping out the little colored die cuts when I'm all done. I think that that is just so amazing to see all these cute little critters with the little white border. That might make me strange, but if it does, I don't mind being strange because I think this is just the cutest thing. Okay, so now let's get started with the seesaw slider portion of the card. When I am making a seesaw slider card, I pull out this little I'm not really sure what it is, like a little wonky H piece, and I position that on my card because you don't want it to be right in the center. You need it to be either a little bit up or a little bit down to make room for the seesaw portion. So I positioned it a little bit down on my card front, and I die cut that so that I would have a good understanding of where my card was going to lay out. And while I was die cutting, I die cut the rest of the pieces for my seesaw slider. So I have the actual slider mechanism. I cut 2 of the little sleeves for the pull tab. I cut 2 pull tabs and a bunch of little football pieces and a bunch of circle pieces. And now all I'm doing is just playing with the layout of my card. I wanted to have the little bunny with the microphone popping up from the little gazebo stage, and then the little bunny playing one of the instruments is going to pop up from behind the little fence. I thought that was just going to be super cute. So now that I have everything kind of figured out, I'm going to start assembling the seesaw slider. So I have 2 football pieces, and they are scored down the center so that you can fold them in half. And I'm going to pop them into the little slit that that little wonky H piece cut, and I'm going to butt them up so that the flat edges are butted up right against each other. You want them to be touching. I'm going to use a little liquid glue behind one of the circle pieces and adhere that on top. This piece here is going to be where I adhere the little bunny on the front of my card so that it can slide up and down. So I have a couple key rules that I try to follow whenever I'm creating an interactive card, but especially a slider interactive card. You will see me throughout the rest of the video testing the slider mechanism frequently. The worst thing in the world for me is when at the end of the card you go to pull the pull tab and something is sticking because you've glued something incorrectly, or maybe you didn't cut the slit wide enough or in the right spot. So I'm going to be testing this slider mechanism throughout the rest of the video, and I'll give you a couple tips too. So here I am testing it. One of the things I like to do, I find that paper on paper sometimes doesn't want to slide really well because of that friction. So I just grab my anti-static powder tool, you know, like what you would use for embossing, and I am just going to, all throughout this video, powder the heck out of this card. So anytime, any pieces that you have touching each other but you want to be sliding, I'm going to add the powder. So I added the powder in those tracks, and I slid the little slider mechanism up, and I powdered the bottom as well. So now I flipped this card front over, and I've adhered another circle piece to the back. And this is just going to make sure that those little half-folded footballs aren't going to go anywhere. They're stuck in their little slider tracks now. Add some more powder and test out the sliding mechanism to make sure it's working, and it is, so that's great. Okay, don't make the same mistake that I did, because you want to complete your card front. Any inking that you want to do, any stamping on your background, you really want to do that before you start assembling the mechanism. I didn't. I forgot. So that's okay. I can easily go back and just stencil over these little tracks and those little folded pieces. That's no big deal. The big deal comes at the end of the card when I realized I forgot to stamp my sentiment. Right after my ink blending, I should have stamped my sentiment and I completely forgot. Turns out okay, but you definitely want to, before you start assembling this Seesaw Slider mechanism, you want to do your stenciling. So I used the Rainy Day stencil, and I used some Marina Madness to blend off the top of that stencil to create the cloudy border. And I used Prickly Pear at the bottom of the stencil to create that grassy border. And that is just the little backdrop for my bunny band scene. I used a little mini brad through the center of my card front where it cuts that little hole, and it goes right through this little wonky mechanism so that it will attach to the card. So now where we folded those little footballs in half for those slider pieces, I added a foam square and put another football piece on top of that, but going up and down. And I did that on both sides. And when you do that, you want to make sure that one slider piece is at the top and the other is at the bottom. And so then your little wonky piece is kind of going to be at a diagonal when you adhere those. This is the pull tab mechanism strip. You don't have to do this step, but I like to reinforce this pull tab because this is what's going to be really giving the card a workout. So I cut 2 of them and I double them up and just glue them together. You don't have to, but it just provides some more stability for the pull tab. So once the pull tab is done, you need to make these little sleeves so that the pull tab has somewhere to rest and some guidance so that it doesn't just wobble all over the back of your card. So to do that, there are score lines that are scored into this pull tab little holder, and it creates this little box. And what I like to do, because my fingers are chubby, is use a bone folder to really get in there and adhere that together. You're just going to fold it over and create that little box. I use 2 of them. You only need 1, but I use 2 just for extra stability. Now it's time to figure out where I want to put those little pull tab boxes. And to do that, I'm just going to line up where I want my pull tab to lay and then just mark it with a pencil where I want those sleeves to go. Once I have that marked, I'll just use some liquid adhesive and just kind of put that in place there. And since I used a liquid adhesive, I can wiggle that around if I don't get it quite right, and that gives me enough time just to slide that pull tab in and make sure that I have everything lined up. And then once again, because of my chubby fingers, they don't fit in the little sleeve, I'm going to use my bone folder and press that onto the back of my card front and just make sure that's going to adhere really well. So here's why you're going to see why I want 2 of those little sleeves, just to make sure that that pull tab doesn't wobble too much. Once again, you only need to have 1. I just like to have the 2 of them. Once they're all adhered down, I can slide my pull tab right in, and then I'm going to grab another foam square, put that right through the little notch onto the pull tab like I did at the bottom to adhere the mechanism that would slide back and forth, and just pop another football on top, and here you go. Works perfectly. And like I said, I tested making sure this would pull all throughout this video just to make sure that it was going to work out well. Now it's time to assemble the front of the scene, and I wanted to show you that my little critters from the bunny band stamp set were too small. The little footballs and circles were kind of sticking out, and I didn't like the way that looked, so I just trimmed a little bit off. It's perfectly okay to trim a little bit, just don't trim too much because you don't want those pieces to be falling back behind your card front. I also wanted to make sure that I covered up that brad that's in the middle of my card, so I put those little dancing bunnies up on top of a hay bale to cover that up, but when I added them with my foam tape, I made sure that the tape was not interfering with that brad so that if it needed to move, it could. Another tip, other than to test your slider mechanism frequently and to use the powder plentifully, is don't be afraid of foam tape. This card is going to be thick. I knew that going in, and so I just was not afraid to double up on my foam. So the gazebo there is double layer. the little bunnies themselves that move are just a single layer, but I'm going to be adding even more foam tape to the back to make sure that nothing interferes with this slider card. Okay, so here's where you see I messed up and I didn't stamp my sentiment in the beginning, so make sure that you do. I just grabbed my Raven Hybrid ink and my stamp positioner and it worked out okay. If it didn't work out stamping on the background, I would have just stamped this sentiment onto a strip and taped it onto the front. So now it's time to add this card front onto a card base. To do that, I have doubled up a layer of foam tape and then I cut that in halves because I needed skinny strips of tape. You want to make sure that the foam tape does not interfere with your mechanism. So here's another time that you're going to see me wiggle and bend and move around this seesaw slider mechanism to make sure that anywhere I'm putting the foam tape is not going to touch that mechanism. I'm going to add enough foam tape that this won't collapse on my card base. Give it one more test, making sure that nothing is touching that foam tape, and add it to the front of my card. And that completes this fun bunny band seesaw slider card. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you again soon. Bye.